Viewer contributions make local programming possible on WNIN. Become a member of WNIN with your contribution so we can continue to make this programming available. Visit WNIN.org and click on the donate button.
The Indiana House of Representatives passed their budget bill this week. We'll talk about the budget and other legislative issues with Indiana State Representative Alex Burton. WNIN Lawmakers starts right now. Welcome to WNIN Lawmakers. I'm John Gibson, news manager for WNIN FM. Before we check in with State Representative Burton, here's a report from Indiana Public Broadcasting's Brandon Smith on what happened in the General Assembly this past week.
The House GOP budget plan increases K-12 education funding by 2% each year, cuts most state agencies by 5%, reduces local public health funding, and does not eliminate waitlists for care under Medicaid. Republicans say it's about freedom and opportunity. Democrats call it a missed opportunity. House-approved legislation empowers the Attorney General to go after businesses that might employ undocumented immigrants, and it allows the governor to withhold state funding from local governments and law enforcement agencies that don't fully cooperate with federal immigration authorities. Supporters say Indiana must play a role in immigration. Critics call the measure discriminatory. And a bill with bipartisan support and opposition bans transgender women from competing in collegiate athletics, aligning with a recent federal executive order. Proponents say it's about fairness, while opponents charge that it does nothing to address actual inequities in college sports. For Indiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Brandon Smith at the State House.
We're joined now by Indiana State Representative Alex Burton, who represents a portion of Vanderburgh County. Thank you so much for joining us, Representative Burton.
Oh, my pleasure. So glad to be here.
Well, glad to have you. You are new to the House of Representatives. We were talking just before we went on about how you found the bathrooms, I understand. Can you tell us how it's going so far in your first experience up there?
Yeah, sure. So I have been I've inundated myself with my committee work. So utilities, family and children, natural resources, and the judiciary. And so that's where I've been doing, asking the questions and getting just familiar with the committee process, and then inserting myself on the House floor when necessary. So.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your background, if you could, and why you ran for state representative.
Yeah, sure. So my background is, born and raised here in Evansville. Went to Indiana State, got a degree in communications, and then a master's in public administration. From there, I interned with Jonathan Winesapple, did a couple internships on Capitol Hill, and then had the privilege and honor of serving on city council for 5 years, 4.5. But that was a privilege and a joy, and was in some leadership capacities in that role. And then when Representative Hatfield decided to become Judge Hatfield, that opened up an opportunity for me, and stepping into that space and representing District 77.
So you have lots of government experience, not just local, but at other levels too, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
All right. Well, let's talk about just about every time I have a Democratic representative on in recent years, of course, we talk about the challenges that Democrats face as the Republicans have that supermajority in both the Indiana House and Senate. In your early going up there, what are the challenges that you see for your party with Republicans having that vast majority?
Yeah, that's a good question. For me, I'd say taking care of the issues, or taking care of the things that Hoosiers care most about. Hoosiers want their utility bills lowered. Hoosiers want their housing issues addressed. Whether we're talking those who are renting or those who own their home. You talk about property taxes and all these other things. It does become frustrating because we don't control the agenda. True. However, we also try to insert ourselves to make legislation that's proposed better, so that the issues that Hoosiers care most about find their way into legislation that is passed.
You mentioned utility rates, and I believe you posted something recently on social media about something that you did addressing that at the State House. Can you tell us what that was about?
Yeah. So I offered an amendment, and it was accepted into a wastewater management bill. And what that will do, the ultimate impact is the state of Indiana, through the Indiana Financial Authority, will now know what states beyond Evansville are under federal mandate or consent decrees.
Beyond Indiana?
Or excuse me, beyond Evansville.
Oh, but just beyond Evansville?
Beyond Evansville, yes. And the reason I thought that was important is because if infrastructure around the state is finding itself crumbling, that then makes a case for the state to invest in infrastructure from Evansville to Gary.
I see.
And my hope is that as cities around the state are seeking to improve their utility infrastructure, that the state of Indiana sees it as an important issue to address so that every Hoosier has access to safe and quality drinking water.
All right. Well, obviously, the big issue this session is the budget bill. Every other year, the General Assembly has to pass a state budget. The budget bill did pass this week in the Indiana House. What are some of the highlights of the bill as you see it?
Yeah, House Bill 1001 was passed, and I did vote against it. I think there is a lot of focus and efforts that are happening that really don't put the common Hoosier in a place to thrive. And yes, I understand budgets are tight. We are, if I'm not mistaken, we passed a budget with $1 billion surplus, which now would increase our surplus that the state has in reserves. And as I mentioned, whether we're talking about housing, utility costs, utility infrastructure, these are the issues that I feel so many Hoosiers care most about, specifically here in Southwest Indiana. And we're doing a whole lot of things and rewarding Hoosiers who don't need any state assistance to take their kids into private school, which now creates some challenges. And again, my hope is that the budget that's ultimately passed doesn't have a negative impact on the city of Evansville. And my fear is that this budget that was passed, and depending on what happens in this next half, could negatively impact the city of Evansville, and that's the absolute wrong thing to do.
You mentioned the surplus. As you see it, is that too big of a surplus to be keeping on hand?
Yeah, some may say that, we need to save it for a rainy day. But from my perspective, COVID-19 was the rainy day. And we got funding from the federal government. And now here we are where there's so much uncertainty, and I completely understand that we need to make sure that we're in a position to thrive, even though the federal government cuts the state of Indiana off. But we also need to take care of all Hoosiers, whether that's our youngest or those who are aging. We have to do more, and I think that with a budget surplus and sitting in reserves of more than $3.5 billion with a B, we could certainly do more to improve the lives of so many.
Yeah. Now, as I understand it, several amendments from the Democrats in the House proposed them. Apparently, every one of those was defeated. What were some of those that you supported that you thought really should be in there? Yeah,
sure. I would say the master amendment that was offered by the Democrats really saw a 2%, a holistic 2% increase to all K through 12 funding schools, and how it would be funded would be a $2 increase on the cigarette tax. Now, some may think that's a bad idea, but if you want to talk about being our budget and making sure that our schools don't suffer by the actions of the state, imposing a $2 tax on cigarettes, I would completely be okay with, and I supported the amendment. That alone got us to filling some of the gaps that are now going to be a shortfall on the budget that was passed.
You mentioned also federal funding and a lot of uncertainty from D.C. these days. What are the concerns about what might happen in terms of federal funding for the state of Indiana and ultimately the communities around Indiana?
Yeah. I know that the state has reduced its Medicaid cap to 500,000 persons, and those who are going down this route with Medicaid have to either work 20 hours a week or volunteer 20 hours a week. And even moving beyond that, should the funding be stripped completely of the from the United States Department of Education, that then leaves a lot of concern for the student who is attending the public school. And I believe that, during the course of the campaign, what was raised was a lot of talk of Project 2025. And now what we're seeing is the reality of Project 2025 coming to reality, and really leaves a concern for our most vulnerable students. This impacts their ability to get lunch and breakfast at the school, at the schools, and just overall quality of education. I'm completely concerned, and for the teachers' well-being with all these cuts for already overburdened teachers. What is this going to do? And frankly, I'm concerned.
Yeah. Well, property tax reform was a big issue, certainly a big issue of Governor Braun's. What are your thoughts on the property tax reform that's been submitted?
Yeah, my colleagues across the aisle will say this isn't property tax reform, this is property tax relief.
Yeah.
And frankly, I think there are some things that we could be doing, capping the 2 to 3% increase in assessed value in a year. I think that would be a smart thing to do. But we also have to take into account that the property taxes take care of our local entities. And without that funding, our local entities, whether we're talking our schools, our fire, or police, are all going to be put at risk, which means they're going to have less resources to do the job that we expect them all to do.
Yeah. Now, as I understand it, Governor Braun is threatening to veto the budget bill, or the property tax reform bill, I should say, that has passed the Senate. What do you think that's going to do to the process?
It makes it interesting, certainly. Being in the super minority, I think this may be an opportunity for us to advocate for Hoosiers, but it's also very telling when there is a super majority and there are things that they can't agree on. I've said it at the Meet Your Legislatures, and I'll say it again, Democrats are not responsible for anything that's currently happening in the state of Indiana. And I believe that our pathway forward is policy-based. It takes care of all Hoosiers and doesn't single out anyone and focuses on those who most need the state to act on their behalf.
Right. Well, several bills have been passed so far this session. We're at the halfway point, as we mentioned. Several bills proposed this year about adding small modular nuclear reactors to help feed the need for more energy usage by data centers. You voted against that House Bill 1007. Are you opposed to the small nuclear reactors, or just how the bill was written?
Well, my focus on the Utilities Committee is to make sure that energy relief and other forms of energy are certainly at the table and at the forefront of all things being discussed. My concern is that we're putting small modular reactors, a form of nuclear energy, ahead of wind and solar. And I think that the residents in Southwest Indiana not only want, but are interested in seeing their bills, their energy utility bills reduced. And investing hundreds of millions of dollars into an unproven energy source has some concerns from my end. I completely understand the need for data centers and the investments of the small modular reactors, and I'm looking forward to Rockport being a potential site. But at the same time, I'm also looking forward to legislation that brings about the opportunity for wind and solar to be more of a use here in the state of Indiana.
Now, that's the idea, right? That if you start these nuclear reactors, that will help attract data centers to the state, and that's why supporters obviously say we need to do that. Do you agree with that? Do you feel that without without those reactors, such businesses or centers might look other places?
That's certainly an opportunity for them to look other places. But I'm pretty sure the chairman of the utilities and those in leadership have had the conversations and are attracting those entities into the state. And I'm all for economic development, but I also care about those who have sent me to Indianapolis to represent them, and they care a whole lot about their energy utility bills. And again, I knew 1007 was more than likely going to pass, and I voted against it just because there are, not only were there representatives and some of my constituents who came to the State House to voice their opposition. But then there's also the opportunity, again, for us to focus on the things that directly impact our utility bills. And I think that should be more of a priority than looking at other energy sources.
Yeah. All right, well, let's move on to another House bill that you did vote against, House Bill 1004. It would penalize nonprofit hospitals for charging more than 265% of Medicare facility fee. It did pass the House and now is headed to the Indiana Senate. What were your issues with that particular bill?
Yeah, there were several hospital bills that came forward that I think were intentionally targeting some players in the state. And I'm not for bills that target potential players in the state at any point in time. And so I felt the best thing to do in that point in time was to vote against the bill.
Now, in terms of law enforcement, we had a bill that, although Indiana law enforcers already are required to assist federal agents in that case, House Bill 1531 would increase penalties against jurisdictions that don't comply. The concern being in reference to increased immigration efforts. Why did you vote against that bill?
Yeah, sure. So I offered 2 amendments to that bill, and specifically one to penalize employers who were knowingly or who were receiving tax credits but still hired knowingly persons illegal. The offered amendment was defeated. I also offered an amendment for businesses who received tax credits from the state who knowingly hired illegal immigrants, and that bill was defeated as well. Again, this bill is targeting a specific group of people coming into the state, and it has nothing to do with immigrant reform or immigrant policy. This has everything to do with playing onto the fears that the federal government and national political landscape has, which, again, does us no justice. What about those who are here legally? They're facing threats and other things that I just don't feel comfortable supporting or going down as it relates to implementing good policy.
I believe there were some concerns on this bill regarding giving a lot more power to the state's attorney general, right?
That was also a very concerning thing, both with this bill and 1004. This gives the attorney general a whole lot more power, whether he wants to fish around in hospital records or make a statement as it relates to immigration. This is giving him the free-for-all to do all things, and I think that is the absolute wrong move for the Hoosiers.
We talked a little bit about utility costs. Obviously, that's a big issue for folks here in Southwest Indiana. You were on that committee, and I've asked some of our other guests about this too. What are there any things really that the General Assembly can do to perhaps bring down utility costs?
Yeah, I certainly think there are things they could do, but they're not willing to do. And that has me in a position where I have to get creative and figure out ways to not only advocate for those in Southwest Indiana, but those across the state. If we have had the largest turnout at an IURC meeting ever recorded, and the increase still passed unanimously, that leads to some concerns. And if what's happening in Southwest Indiana continues to happen, who's to say that other regions of the state won't have the same issues as it relates to rates increasing from their energy providers?
The Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission, you just referenced there, that was the hearing that drew such a big crowd here in Evansville. That board is appointed by the governor, all 5 members. Do you think that's a good idea, or would you like to see a different process there? I
would absolutely love to see a different process implemented, even if that meant representatives from different parts of the state being considered, so that the IURC isn't totally made up of people living in central Indiana. And in fact, I am working on a letter to send to Speaker Houston now with Representative Hostetler, Representative Ledbetter, and Senator Tomes discussing the opportunity that I see for us to do an interim study committee on utility cost. My end goal is to see some sort of formula implemented that passes the smell test so that the burden isn't just completely put on the ratepayers to update all infrastructure throughout the state.
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago, Senator Jim Toms, who you mentioned there, He suggested the idea of making the IURC an elected commission. What do you think of that idea?
Yeah, I certainly would have some concerns from that, only because the General Assembly is trying to make all races partisan. And our utility bills aren't a partisan issue. Both Republicans and Democrats pay their bills on a monthly basis. And so I certainly would love to see if there is a General Assembly appointment, a governor appointment, or even if that meant a representative from, say, Evansville, the executive, whether it's the county commissioners or the mayor, they vote or they select someone to serve on the utility commission. I wouldn't have any problem with that.
Yeah, you would like that. Now, here's a measure that raised a few eyebrows. It was a House Bill 1008 that would form a commission to explore possibly annexing some Illinois counties. It passed the House. Again, caught a few people by surprise, I believe. You opposed the bill. Why did you vote no?
Yeah, so the Democrats offered an amendment to simply make sure that the counties that are exploring coming into Indiana aren't a drain on the state, to make sure that those counties contribute their fair share. And the counter argument to that is we have to make sure that we're taking care of Indiana first. Why are we looking to expand our territory when there are Hoosiers who are depending on Indiana to act and there's been no action?
Yeah. And I don't believe Illinois is up for this idea. Are they, or do you know of any possible cooperation between the two states?
This is going to be a long process. So I think this commission is going to explore the feasibility, and then once the feasibility is determined and it's both embraced by both Indiana and Illinois, they would then vote on it. And then once that measure is then voted on, it would then be sent to Congress for them to have a final action. So certainly a lot of steps that would have to take place.
And can you shed any light on what counties might try to be annexed by Indiana? Are we talking in the Chicago area or down our way? Or?
There are the 33 counties represent southern. There are some southern Illinois counties, and there are some outside the Chicagoland area that are all have voted to explore leaving the state of Illinois.
I see. All right. Well, we've got just a few minutes left here. Any other issues in the General Assembly that you'd like to mention? Maybe some things you'd like to see happen as the session continues? Yeah,
sure. And it certainly is. It's more so of a long-term issue. So as I mentioned earlier, I am on the Family and Children Affairs Committee, and what everyone can agree on is that the Department of Child Services is broken. And so I am focused in really building relationships to make sure that I'm able to weigh in on rebuilding what the future of the Department of Child Services looks like.
And there's a couple minutes left here. What do you see as some of the greatest challenges that the state faces right now? Maybe some of the state's biggest strengths right now?
I would say the biggest challenges from my perspective is seeing some of the policy issues that Democrats care deeply about and that directly impact majority of Hoosiers are not being heard and or being considered. I mentioned, we're looking at having a $4 billion in reserves. I would absolutely love to see $500 million of that investing in the housing and better weatherizing housing, because we know that everyone doesn't own their home, but at the same time, we know that people are living in homes that are poorly insulated, especially in weather like this. It's cold outside, your thermostat's reading 68, but it still feels like it's 60 degrees inside. And so that is a problem that has to be addressed, and I'm looking forward to be at the solution.
Indiana's strengths, you're now a state representative. What do you see as perhaps some of the positive things that Indiana is doing?
Absolutely. Our economic outlook is phenomenal. Things have gone our way a lot of times, and as we're expanding and the economy seems to be strong at times when other states are struggling, we have to build on that momentum. We have to use what's working and continue to make it better, and what we see and what we identify as not working have to make better.
State Representative Alex Burton, we'll have to end it there. We thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
All right, thank you for being with us. I'm John Gibson, News Manager for WNIN FM. Thanks for watching WNIN Lawmakers.